Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are hangingontohope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. Hello, and welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Karen B. On today's show, we welcome Daniel Cruz to share about his new book, Don't Adopt Until You Read This Book, a book about transracial adoption from a biracial adoptee's perspective. Daniel is an author and speaker and family friend. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
Good. So I've known you and your wife, Alicia, for at least 25 years. I was trying to think back to see what year I actually met Alicia. I know I met her at, a Bible study. And I remember I was friends with Alicia before my mom passed away, and that was in 1998. So it's been at least 25 years. And I know neither one of us had kids when we first met, because I remember we both had our first kids.
Yeah.
So, and then, it's been a long time.
We got a lot of good memories. They have a lot of pictures. I think Josiah and Desi are the same age. And so birthday parties were, I remember that, I think probably their second birthday or third birthday when they had the smash cakes.
That was fun. So funny because they gave cakes. Alicia made these little cakes for Desi and for Josiah. And Desi was just kind of picking at it. Josiah was takes after his mom. He likes the frosting. He had it in his ear and everywhere.
We have pictures and video of all that.
Wow. Yeah, really good memories. And Seth had actually reached out to Jared, so I know they've reconnected too. So
Jared did mention that.
Yeah, so we go way back. And so I know that me and Alicia used to pray every week on the phone during those really difficult times for me. And so we always interceded for our marriages. And so I heard a little bit of your story as it unfolded, but as I read the book, I didn't know it obviously to this depth. So do you just want to start out by sharing your motivation for writing this book?
Well, probably around the time I think we were having kids and all that was when some of the urge for me to find my birth parents had kind of subsided. Prior to that, I had never really met anybody that looked like me or could even, quote unquote, diagnose what I was. But, once I had kids, their faces looked like mine and they talked like me, they acted like me. And so I kind of felt that urge to meet my birth parents kind of subside a bit. But once I turned 40, things started coming up. I don't know if it was trauma or what it was, but I was drinking a lot, during that time, kind of going through a midlife crisis, so to speak, maybe a little bit early. And I just needed to know who I was. And prior to that, I didn't even know what my ethnicity was.
Yeah.
I took a DNA test and we got the results back and it just said half black, half white, which wasn't good enough for me. I mean, I thought that it could be anything. It could be Dominican, it could be Puerto Rican, Cuban, something like that. But at that point, I had already kind of dipped my foot into finding out my identity. So there wasn't really any turning back at that point. So.
Yeah. And as I was reading your book, I could really see how not knowing your identity affected, different stages of your life, like growing up and then teenage and high school and all that. So I could feel what you were going through just as you were sharing in your book.
Yeah. People would always take their best guess at what they thought I was. They always had a Theo somebody or an uncle or a cousin that looked just like me and would show me a picture and it looked nothing like me. But growing up was always just kind of put in different boxes and called different things, derogatorily or in a friendly manner. But it wasn't as big a deal, even though I shed a lot of light on it in the book. But by the time I was in adulthood, it was an itch that, I couldn't scratch. So,
yeah. Well, hi, this is Brenda J. How are you?
Hey,
nice
Brenda,
to meet
I'm
you.
Good to meet you as well. Yeah.
This is a good topic for us to talk about as we have not covered it yet on our podcast. And there are listeners out there that this can help. Can you share a little about how being adopted and being raised in a multiracial home caused you trauma?
Yeah. For myself being multiracial, I really had no idea what race I was growing up. But then it was pretty much aggravated by the fact that both of my adoptive parents were of different race. My adoptive father was Mexican American and my mother was white. They were divorced when I was 7. So I was basically raised in a white home from that point on. And just all of the kids in the neighborhood, we had Alan that lived down the street. He was black and both of his parents were black. And John that lived across the street, he was white. Both of his parents were white. And then Anthony, Mexican, both of his parents were Mexican, but I wasn't either of those, and being biracial or multiracial, people tend to think that, well, you're kind of the bridge, you're both black and white, but really I was neither. Black people will be the first ones to tell you you're not black, and white people will be the first ones to tell me that I'm not white. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of, like the man without a country, but I was the man without a race, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hits home for me a lot because my kids are biracial and they're half Chinese. So yeah, they do really struggle with that. And you don't think about that as a parent. We got married and he was Chinese, so we had children together, but I didn't think about the implications that it would have as far as that goes, like exactly what you're saying, like what they identify as. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think they identify with my side as much as the other culture. So
yeah, when they go to fill out the bubble sheet that asks them what race they are, now it has multiracial in there. But when I was growing up, it was either you were, white, black, or Mexican or Asian.
Yeah.
But that's when you kind of realize that you're different. You're something else. And, growing up, I always thought I was neither. But I've come to realize over the last decade or so that mixed race people are a race of their own. They're a type of people of their own. Your kids that are half Chinese, half white, they're neither one of those. They're half. They're a mixed race child. And at least here in the United States, we have a whole population of mixed race people. A good, I think, 1.5% to 2% of people in the United States are of mixed race. So we are perhaps a new race, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they identify more with the Asian culture as far as when they would fill out that form. Mm-hmm. If it didn't ask both. But my son, when he was a little, I don't know how old he was, if he was a little kid though, and he said to me, he put his hand in the middle of his face and split it in half, and he goes, I know I'm half Chinese, Mom, but I'm looking in the mirror and I can't tell which side is the Chinese side and which side is the white side.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, honey, it's not like that. You stir it up in a pot and then you pour it out. And then he goes, oh.
How old was he when he did
that?
I think he was 3.
They're mixed with 2 different types of genes, and they're one homogeneous person, just like a cake isn't. You can't really taste the flour or the sugar or the baking powder in there. I mean, it's mixed in and it's a cake.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cute though.
I do think that multiracial people are beautiful. I mean, that's one thing that you tend to see, I think, is that there's, I don't know what it is about the multiracial that there's just a beauty in that.
Yeah.
So shame breeds in isolation and in silence. And you say in your book, this is a quote from your book, silence doesn't preserve innocence. It preserves confusion. I could see why some parents may be afraid to talk too much about the birth parents for fear that would somehow put distance between you and them. Did you want to speak into that at all?
Yeah, I actually waited a long time before I even mentioned finding my birth parents. And it wasn't something that I even thought I would bring up with my mother, just thinking that I would hurt her. And in a way, I think it did a little bit, but she was always my mother and she always will be. But this was something more selfish. I wanted to know for me and I wanted to know for my children, but I never mentioned it with my mother that I ever even wanted to find them. And she never mentioned it. She really never mentioned. I always knew that I was adopted growing up, but she never talked about my race. She would sometimes take a guess as well as to what I was, that I was some sort of Hispanic or a mix between Black and Hispanic. But, everyone around me, my uncles, my grandfather, grandmother, and they're all white. And growing up with them, I felt like I was white, but I didn't look white. My hair's curly, skin's brown, and looked a little different.
So she didn't know the races of your birth parents, you don't think?
No. When my birth mother had gone to Tucson to have the baby, she was in a convent, in a Catholic nun convent for wayward children. So she was sent there at 16 years old. And once she had the baby, when she had me, the next day she was gone. Policy was to separate them before there was any sort of bond made between the baby and the mother, because that's not what she was there for. She was there go and come back, start over again. But no, my mother didn't know anything. She had a few clues, and I do kind of mention that in the book, that she, on my original birth certificate, it said baby boy Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just how they named kids back then, baby boy Johnson, I had searched based on, the last name Brown in Tucson, not knowing my mother was from Memphis, searched in yearbooks for people that looked like me that had the last name Brown, and that anywhere. But that was the only lead and information that, my mother had as far as where I was from or my origin.
Wow.
Well, you lived for 40 years not knowing about your birth parents. You share in the book how painful that was in your different stages of growing up. Some people would ask, what are you? Did you want to share more insights on that?
Yeah, they would ask, what are you? But I knew what they meant. They would ask where I was from, and I would tell them Tucson, and they would think, well, no, but where were your parents from?
Yeah.
And they wanted to know my ethnicity, whether I was Puerto Rican or whatever I was. And it didn't bother me too much because people were always pretty nice to me. And I think I portray that in the book as well, that people were just curious, that they wanted to know, why did I have this fluffy curly hair? Why was my skin brown? Why was my Spanish no good? I didn't look like my mother wherever we went, whether it was a store or school. My mom would come pick me up from school and would get the third degree because there was no way that she could have been my mother. But, people asking me, what are you? It does sound a little bit, like they're objectifying you, but I really knew what they meant. And I ask people the same thing now. I can tell. I can tell people who are mixed with, more than one.
Right. And I think for me, it's normal to ask that because I have children with, more than one race. So yeah, I never meant to be offensive. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I did meet someone yesterday and he said, I'm half Korean and half white. And I could tell, I was like, oh, okay. And it was just interesting to me, to see the differences.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm always curious to know, was the dad black and the mom white, or was the mom white and the dad black?
Yeah, I know my ex-brother-in-law, from my first marriage, he married a black girl, and they had to have 3 children, and one of the girls has blue eyes and lighter skin. So even, I'm sure it's, genes are interesting how they work.
There is a difference in that type of mixture, if I could call it that. When the dad is white and the mom is black, the kids tend to look, the curly hair might be a little bit blonder, rather than if the dad is black and the mom is white, it looks more homogenous, like something different. But that's something I kind of picked up over the years. I could tell.
One's more dominant or something.
Yeah, because my mom's Norwegian, so she's totally opposite of what I look like, because I look like my dad, who was Polish, and my youngest son has green eyes and lighter hair. So yeah, that was very surprising. So
yeah.
You say that you're not anti-adoption, and your book is not either. It's pro-truth, is what you say. What advice do you have for those that have adopted a child that is a different race than the adopted parents?
For those the transracial adoptive parents, I would say to dig into the child's culture, or their would-be culture, and to see how much interest they have in it. Because a lot of times there's something calling out inside of them that wants to know things, or they want to listen to a certain type of music, or they like to dance, or things like that. But to explore the type of culture, not necessarily force it on them or make it weird, but give them the option. Have friends. The parents have friends that are of the race that the child is always helpful. Because, it also helps to know that the parents accept them like that, which, in my family, it wasn't really like that. Even though they accepted me, my mom's side of the family, they didn't have any friends that were Black or Mexican or Asian. And so that always kind of made me think I wasn't fully accepted, or I wouldn't be accepted had I not been adopted. So
it's important to at least give them that exposure to the culture. Wow. That makes sense. That would help with the shame aspect of it.
You talk in the book about the importance of culture. You say, I was adopted into a culture that didn't adopt my culture. You stress how important this is. Can you explain?
Well, I mean, nowadays it would be called racist, but there was a lot of racial slurs about people that weren't white around my house, even though they weren't directed at me. Well, my parents adopted me and they loved me. But like I say in the book, they really didn't love the culture. They didn't adopt the culture and pretty much they kind of scrubbed that from my upbringing. I don't think they really accepted the culture that I would have been brought up in or the race that I was, that we at that time had no idea what it was. But whatever it wasn't, I didn't feel that it was accepted. Not that I wanted to be a part of that culture, but I just felt that there was something wrong with that culture because it had not been accepted or entertained in my household.
Did you want to share the birth story too, how you found out and everything? Because that's interesting in itself.
Well, the birth part, back in 1971, it was the first year of forced integration in Marianna, Arkansas. And so my mother and father, both 15 years old, were sophomores at that school. And my mom was a hippie, and they were the only ones that would even speak to Black people. So they would go around with their do-rags and their fists in the air and fight for the cause of Black people and integrating them into their school. But eventually the two groups, meeting out in the woods and smoking pot and listening to music, they started dating. So they dated for about a year and a half, and then she got pregnant. So they tried to hide it for a while. She'd wear baggy clothes. And when they did find out she was pregnant, they wanted to say it was one of the other white hippie kids in their crew, but they figured it out pretty quickly. And from my Uncle Bill's account, he told me that they had come to the house. My grandfather had come to the house asking for my father, who was, young kid at the time. And my Uncle Bill was back on spring break from school. He was in a university. He was going to go on to be a lawyer and a politician. But he tells me shotgun in my granddaddy's face and told him to get off the property. I don't know how much truth there is in that. And
there's a lot of emotions. Yeah.
What happened is they came back with the police to arrest my dad, young kid, 16-year-old kid. They're going to arrest him, which we know, and back in those days, he probably wouldn't have made it to trial because it wasn't even legal for him to even speak to my mother, let alone, have a relation with. But between the time that first visitation and when they came back with the police, my grandmother, my father's mother, had sent him to Chicago to live with my aunt, with his oldest sister, which was, maybe 10, 15 years older than him, so she could negotiate the terms of him coming back without being arrested. So they make a way for him to escape to Chicago. But my grandmother owned an ice cream store called the Dairy Bar, and they went to the Dairy Bar and they burned it down. And it was downtown in this kind of town square in Marianna where you have businesses on one side of the street and then a park in the middle and then businesses on the other. And so, one side was businesses and one side was white. So hers was on the end, and they let all of the Black businesses, downtown burn, which really caused it was a big deal back then.
Wow.
Talking to my father even today, that he carried a lot of guilt about that because when he came back, they had really blamed a lot of that on him.
Wow.
It's kind of true, or me. But shortly after that, they sent my mother to Tucson to have the baby. And so she stayed there for 6 months and just was there with the girls, getting counseling, getting kind of set in her ways or in the way that she should go. And very tough time for her. But she has the baby. And on the other side of it, my adoptive mother and father were not able to have kids. And so they were waiting for a baby. And they get a call late at night saying that we have one. It's going to be a hard to place child. Are you interested? And so that hard to place child was me. So yeah, back then you would think a hard to place child meant that, they had Down syndrome or cleft palate or something like that. But hard to place back then was a mixed race child. Would have, I could have spent my entire life, adolescent life, in foster care. So you really came in. And
yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And you got to meet both of them too, didn't you?
Yeah. No, I have a good relationship with both my mother and father. My dad is a pastor at a Baptist church in Arkansas, and my mother's a school teacher in Memphis.
Wow.
Dad had 2 daughters and a son, of course, younger than me. And then my mother has a daughter, which is 18 months younger than me. And I've met all of them. Talked to my mom a lot on the phone. Talked to my dad a lot on the phone. They've come out here several times. I've been out there many times.
It's great.
So, yeah.
It had to be healing for all of you, I would think.
So they were never together. The dad went his separate way and your mom went her separate way because they had to, because of the mix. They weren't allowed to be together. Okay. Wow.
When my mother went back to Arkansas, she had said in her notes and some of the counseling notes while she was at that convent that she never wanted to go back there again. So she went back and got her high school diploma through correspondence and then went to the University of Memphis and didn't go back there for a long time. I mean, she's lived in Memphis ever since. Just hated the racism of where she grew up.
Well, yeah.
Wow.
That's horrible.
Yeah, that is bad.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So this book can be used by faith communities seeking to do better, talking about, racism and everything you were talking about there with racial and relational complexity. Can you share how your book can speak into that and to start discussions, which is definitely needed?
Yeah, it's very common in the faith community or in the church. People will adopt. And now, these days, it's very rare that you'll have white babies up for adoption, which, it takes a long time and a lot of money to wait for babies. And so the way it usually goes is that they'll adopt kids that are not the same race as they are. Whether the kids are mixed race or not, they're adopting a child from another race into their home and their culture, which the Christian church is very accepting of that. And they always have been. But for the child, there are a lot of considerations that should be made. Like we had just mentioned, 2-3 black kids adopted into a white family and that go to a predominantly white church can be a little bit difficult, even though the congregants are accepting of them.
Yeah.
There'll be a time, and it usually comes, in adolescence, that those kids will realize that something's different about them and they're treated differently in subtle ways. And they're going to reach out to their roots or even rebel.
Yeah. There definitely needs to be more discussions too about all that. So it can be used in a lot of ways.
Yeah, this has me thinking a lot. There is so much to think about when you adopt. And like in my case, my kids, their grandmother and their family the Chinese side was in their life. So they learned about the culture quite a bit and studied it on their own. And if you don't know what it is, that would be extremely hard. So I feel for what you're saying completely. I can't put myself in your shoes, but I understand why you're saying that parents that are adopting you're saying try to embrace the culture they came from more and allow them to explore that, right?
Yes. Yeah, I am. I'm not saying not to adopt at all. I'm saying please adopt. Mm-hmm. I was rescued out of, there was no way that my parents could have stayed together and tried to raise me. We would have all been dead.
Yeah.
But showing compassion toward families that are not able to raise their children to adopt a child and to give them opportunities that they wouldn't normally have is essential. And that's something I think that God has really ordained it that way for us to adopt children into our homes. But, we're learning along the way. There hasn't been such a big wave of adoption in our history since, just these last 50, 60 years where we have adoption agencies and things like that, where kids are adopted outside of their families. So there's a lot for us to learn.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, I remember before I got married, I had family members it was extended families, not my immediate family, but kind of saying things to me like, are you sure, what if you have children? Like, what do you, and I couldn't even understand what they were talking about. Cause I guess I'm naive. I guess like my daughter so she would say racially ignorant because I didn't think about that. And now it's really making me think. So thank you for that. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And I always went by that verse. We had a photo hanging in our house with the scripture, by one spirit, we're all baptized into one body.
Yeah.
And that's just how I feel. I mean, we're spirits living inside of a earthly body.
Yeah.
So.
We are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So your book offers great advice for those who have already adopted and may be facing some challenges. You say in your book, you're not a bad parent. You're a real one. And real parenting doesn't follow scripts, especially not when trauma is in the room. This book is not here to shame you. It's here to help you love more honestly. Because adopted children aren't blank slates. They are stories in motion. How has it helped you knowing more of where you came from?
Well, I remember when I had got the DNA test back, my oldest son, he was really just passionately in love with basketball, and that's all he wanted to do. And he wanted just to play basketball and be in the NBA one day. And there was a lot of anticipation about me getting those results back. And when I got them back and it said that I was half black and half white, my oldest son was like, yes.
This improves my chances.
A good portion of blackness, I think. I still think he kind of, he's a big Kobe Bryant fan, and he, even though he's a quarter black, he identifies a lot with African American culture, for sure. But yeah, just me knowing my ethnicity is really kind of put some of the pieces there that were missing. You know, I said you're not a bad parent, you're a real one. You know, we're all learning how to be parents, you know, being racially ignorant, you know, as a parent toward an adoptive child is not even close to the worst thing that could happen. You know, I mean, raising kids is difficult, you know, the way you raise them in the admonition of the Lord. I mean, there's probably a dozen things that are more important than, you know, helping your child understand their race. But this is one that shouldn't be left out, though, especially if we do have the resources and ability to help them in this way. For me, it definitely caused pain, you know, just not knowing, not because I wasn't enough or because I wasn't brought up the way I should have, because I was kind of given it everything that a child would want and a really perfect, semi-perfect upbringing. But these things, they show up early in adolescence, but then if not dealt with, there can be ways they show up in much more malefic ways, you know, as they get into their later years, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was in an abusive marriage for 22 years and I've struggled. I've been out 7 years already. I can't believe it. Karen and I have been friends for 7 years. We're talking about that.
Yeah.
But it's been so hard for me being abused and controlled. I lost my identity and who I was. It's so important to know who you are, and your identity is in Christ.
Yeah.
First and foremost, your identity is in Christ, and we need to know the truth and the word of who we are in Christ. But it is very important to know where you come from and discover your identity so you can be whole. I feel like it's very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things in a faith community that it's very easy to say, you know, like you tell your kids, we're all in one spirit in Christ. But I mean, we live in a body, you know, and we have a soul and we have a mind. And, you know, those things, they have to be cared for because that affects our spirit, the body. Yeah. It's all connected. So that type of care and nurturing to those type of things is going to help a child be whole and grow up to be an adult who's whole, so they can raise your grandchildren to be whole.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
So did you want to share some of the things that you've done to help heal the trauma?
Well,
to be continued. Stay tuned for next week's part 2. You don't want to miss it.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening. And until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.